Welcome to Implicating the Real. Today's show is part 2 of the conversation began in the previous episode. Let's get right into it. Hope you enjoy. There are also realities that are relatively more valid than your own. Your physical table would appear as shadowy in contrast. You would have a sort of super table in those terms. Yours is not a system of reality formed by the most intense concentration of energy. Therefore, it is simply the one that you are tuned to, part of, and parcel of. So that's kind of interesting. We're kind of like dismissive of these like more shadowy versions, and there's another level of reality, at least another level that's more intense than ours.
There was the quote in this chapter, right, about like imagine the table and then imagine like the little like spectral projections of it like going behind it, but then also imagine them like coming before it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure like how literally to take that, or if it was just like an analogy, like the behind part of it.
It just reminds me of like if you've ever done the thing where you like stand up two mirrors facing each other and then you stand in the middle of them and you can see just like the infinite versions of yourself going on. It just reminded me of like a music video thing, you know, like that's kind of what Seth's like. Imagine this like cool thing that would like look cool if it was like in an artsy like film or something.
Yeah, I think it points to like our spatial limitations, because the way we can imagine it, it has to be behind the other one. But in fact, if like space isn't really real in the same terms, like they're all in the same place, but again, it's like the different turning of the dial. You can focus in on that other table.
Yeah.
Like for us here, this table is the one that's real, but the next level, we can just tune into that level. I don't know if he's speaking of probabilities when he's talking about the table specifically.
I don't think he's speaking of probabilities, not specifically.
I don't remember the context, yeah.
I think it was like other dimensional existences, right?
Yeah, like gradations of physical reality. But presumably most of our probable selves would exist on this same level.
Yeah.
Just us doing different actions.
Yeah.
But presumably the important thing about this is that like the line through all these different spectral forms of the table like unites them all as that table, right? Like it's identified as each one of them together is just what that table is.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that gets to our like seemingly perpetual question of like, what is identity?
Yeah.
We've been talking about that. And the more I've been thinking about it, I am like really landing on this, like, it's a unification of action. You know, like the identity that is Michael is just all these subconsciousness unified in the same action. Everything that has free will wanting to be in the same way that like stepping off from the self level to like groups of like family or work group, like you're an identity to the extent that your actions. My family is an identity that we're all like acting as a family together. Our identity as a country is an identity to the extent that we're acting as a country together, or as a world civilization, you know?
Right.
Does that make sense? I think like as a working definition of identity until we find a better one.
Definitely if you would include mental actions as actions, which would also include ideas and beliefs.
And memory, right?
Yeah.
Because we were just talking about potential pasts, right? And how that, like, to me, makes a really difficult case for identity.
I think part of the trouble, too, is we're trying to crawl out of this binary idea of, like, identity being, like, a specific thing. Seth is kind of saying, like, identity exists as a specific thing in a specific context, but as soon as the context changes, the identity changes. Like, those tables, the gradations of those tables are united as an identity, in a way, through that context, but they're also, if that's like a horizontal context, you could have a vertical context that was different.
Yeah, the one difficulty too, though, is like we talked about last time, right, in chapter 6 about like soul, right? And it's like, what is soul if not a uniting force? Like if you're talking about one's soul, you know?
Yeah, but it's not like more of an ultimate, it's not more of like a singular boundary defined identity than any other form of identity, I don't believe.
I guess.
And it is this chapter that Seth drops the little line about him and Jamie Roth
that's right.
being the same entity at some point.
We finally got there.
So like time is involved also in that context of defining an identity.
Yeah, but time that's just one potential past, man.
Right. Where does the problem come in, though?
Because there's another potential past where they weren't, presumably.
That's what I mean. Like, as many contexts as there are identities or ways to look at the identity. And these different dimensions are just focuses on a certain context.
But doesn't that just mean there isn't an identity? That's just a fancy way of saying there isn't a thing you can identify as an identity.
I feel like we got to this in a previous conversation too. Like, you were suggesting that, like, when you put it all together, it kind of like
It just
whitewashes
balances out.
everything away.
Yeah.
And I was trying to say, like, I was using the example of like the puzzle pieces. Like, they're like individual, unique things. And then when you put them all together, they make a rectangle. But like, I thought Seth is saying, like, there's never a rectangle. You put them all together and it's still individual.
Either way, let's stick with the puzzle piece analogy, right? We start off saying each puzzle piece is an identity. And then we start saying like, oh, look, I can put all the puzzle pieces together and I make this larger thing that they all kind of share in. But then if you look at the image on the puzzle, I can make out shapes that are in different colors, that are the images of the puzzle. And the interesting thing about those images is that they have their own discrete area of the puzzle. However, they cross the borders of the puzzle pieces willy-nilly. So now I have this like dual view of the puzzle where I can see the puzzle as a conglomeration of individual pieces, or I can see it as a conglomeration of individual images. And those two do not line up with one another.
No,
right?
Because they're different dimensions.
They're different dimensions of the puzzle. But you could say that, you know, on balance, there's infinitely many ways of dividing up the puzzle that way. If you really want to get
back to infinity.
Right.
But this is what Seth is claiming. It's reality's multidimensional.
But then on balance, any one view of them is equally valid to any other view of them.
Well, we're all about equality.
Yeah, but then identity becomes not useful anymore. Because because it's all like any identity you try to construct is technically valid, right? In the same way as the one you started with.
Sure. But I don't know what makes it valid or invalid, you know?
Right.
Like I don't see what the issue is. I think the last time we talked about this is when Seth was saying like consciousness is highly individualized, or this entity is highly individualized energy.
Right.
That was the quote. And I just don't see a contradiction there or an issue.
Well, because then you can have a new paradigm of identity, right? Whereas instead of this view of things as like this sort of like slurry of stuff that just kind of comes in and out of itself, that's undifferentiated because it's all kind of, you can differentiate it any way that you want. You use the paradigm of like concentration of energy becomes identity, right? Mm-hmm. So your definition of identity is things which have concentrations of energy. And then you can get identity back, right?
Unified in action, I think.
Well, because that's the question for an entity, is like, an entity is an intense like emanation of energy. Does that mean that it's unified in action?
Well, that's what I keep trying to say is like, that's where the context thing comes in, you know? So to whatever extent it is acting in a certain way, you can say that's an identity. I know it gets muddy if you just like every minutia, like you want to call it a different identity, and it becomes hard, but like, this is why we do experience dimensions, because we're holding out these other frequencies so we can focus on this dimension, and we understand what identity means functionally. We understand it within this dimension, you know.
Would you say that a rainstorm is an identity? Because it's like a unity of action, right? Like all the drops are kind of going
People
in the same
like
direction.
Name hurricanes.
Yeah.
You know, like I just point that out because like I feel like our own way of perceiving and experiencing things like seems to suggest that it can be.
Just because they're all valid doesn't mean there's not a purpose in specifically picking certain like arbitrary groupings of stuff. It's easier for us to talk about it. Like, for example, you can say that if I just mash my keyboard right now, that is as valid a word as any other word. But unless we ascribe it meaning, no one's ever going to need this mishmash of letters that also has a comma in it, because it's not useful to us now. Maybe in some other probable reality, that is what Elon Musk named his third child, and maybe we'll talk about that. But in this reality, like, we have these words, we agree on them,
Yeah.
Like I could cut this room up and say like this corner of the table and this chair leg is a thing, but like it's not really ever gonna be relevant unless I make like a tripwire between and talking to somebody about that.
I would agree. So that's the point, right? Is that
Right. Like
if
it's just like a nomenclature thing. It's kind of like the DSM-5. A lot of the things that we thought were disorders turned out not to be. Like homosexuality used to be a disorder, but it wasn't. It's just a grouping of behavior, and it turns out to not be a bad thing. But we name things for convenience, and who's to say that what you think is an arbitrary or like valid but not actual sense of identity in this probable reality is not an actual identity in another reality? Like maybe in another reality, Jane is her own entity, and like Seth and Rob are an entity. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Like,
I feel like the thing you said at the beginning is contradicted by the thing that you said at the end. Because you started off saying like, well, I could arbitrarily divide up these things, but there are practical criteria I can use
in this probable reality, it's practical.
Right. But on balance, if I want to know like the deeper truth of what's going on, if I want to say like, I understand this probable reality is only one of many, I want to know like the true truth. On the true truth, on balance, all of the identities are equally valid, right?
I do agree that they're equally valid. And I think that if you were to sit there and come up with any number of bizarre groupings, because you're the sentient being sitting there thinking of it, you would spawn a probable reality where that is a valid thing.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is like the critique kind of brings us to this, like you can take one of two choices, right? You can either say like, well, that's kind of ridiculous. Let's find a more reasonable criterion to use and then like go down that route. Or you can say like everything's sort of undifferentiated and it doesn't matter. But like, I don't know if you can do both at the same time. Like, I think adopting a view that's like in between the two sort of is self-contradictory.
How would it be ridiculous though if we choose to group things based on stuff that doesn't really matter?
Right. That's why you'd have to find the criterion that actually does work, right? You'd say like, I don't know what it is, but I think that there probably is one. Then you're saying like, this is what it means when you say that there's an identity to a thing, as opposed to this undifferentiated mass of chaos, you know? Whereas like for personal identity, for conscious beings, a criterion could be like, there is this train of like shared past where like having had the mental experience of all of these memories that are an unbroken, chain of cause and effect, right? This long history, there's like some point at which having that history means that this whole history of this like conscious being is one being, as opposed to a different being at every second, right? And then like the memory thing becomes more important to your understanding of personal identity because it becomes crucial to what it means to be a person, right? That's your identification criterion for what a person is, right? But if you don't take a stand on it, then you start being unable to seriously answer questions of like, well, what is a person anyways? And like, how can I talk about people if I don't know what they are? Like that's the real reason is like, how am I going to talk about people in a deep sense if I can't answer like in this fundamental way, what is a person, I guess, would be like the reason that it matters.
I feel like Seth is claiming that it's both. Like, and I think he repeats that often. In the nature of the self, he'll say at this level, I am a human being having a physical experience. And then the higher level, I'm an inner ego or an inner self having its own like inner reality, but also flowering into these multiple different directions, having multiple human experiences. But the thing is, I am part of that. And where I exist is also the inner self. Like I am that inner self. I'm not all of the inner self. Like I'm a part of that. It's not a part of me. And this kind of like hierarchy just keeps going. Like I am this part of that self in this limited context. I have my own values that I'm pursuing within the field of phenomenon that I have my experience. And that's why like I call that a chair and I don't loop its leg to the table and call it something else. Mm-hmm. It's not functional to my value system. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't think Seth is saying like every explanation has like infinite equal validity, but he's saying like there's for every level where someone values something in a certain way, that is valid.
I'm pointing to the cover of the book where it says eternal validity.
Eternal validity of the soul. But like, I'm trying to point to this idea that like every possible explanation has its own equal validity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like identifying the leg of the table with the leg of the chair and calling that something has less functional value to my value system. And I don't think Seth is saying there necessarily is a value system where that is a thing. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't think he's claiming there's a reality where there's a being that like gets something out of grouping things that way.
Well, it seemed to me like that's what we were saying. There was a case where that's true, right?
Right. Like maybe in some other probable reality, some famous artist makes a sculpture of just this, and the meaning of the sculpture is how arbitrary naming conventions are. And then maybe the Zoomers pick up on it, and then they go around laughing and be like, "Oh, look, it's just like a sculpture. It's a chair leg next to a table."
But
and then in that world, that becomes something that has meaning, but not in ours.
Yeah, it would exist as something that has meaning if there was somebody or something there that has a value for that.
Right. But in our reality, it doesn't have a function here. That's what I was trying to tell Joe, that like it basically depends on whether or not there's any practical use for that.
Well, but like isn't the table leg and the chair leg made up of consciousness itself, right? Like, so those consciousnesses presumably are already coordinating with one another to like be there together.
Yeah, but they don't form an identity in the same way that the four legs of the table do or the four legs of the chair do with each other, right?
So how do the legs that are on my body form an identity, right?
I would disagree with you, Michael, and say that they might form an identity, but we're not aware of it. Like, for example, if a spider makes a web right here between these two legs, now the web itself probably has some gestalt consciousness I'm not aware of.
That's true.
And to that, it's like, oh, these are my two foundations. What do you mean these are not valid? I need both these legs to exist. But like to us humans, it's so not functional and practical for us to call this a thing. But to the web, it is, and to the spider, it is.
That's why I keep going back to the word contextual. Like we're within a focus where we have similar value systems, similar points of focus. That's why we can speak to each other and have a pretty good idea of what we mean. Like it's all contextual.
So here's the thing I want to point out, right? The upshot of some of this is that I think if we want to say like identities can come in and come out of being willy-nilly sort of in a practical sense, I think that makes a lot of sense in certain worldviews, right? Where like identity really is just an identification for practical purposes and doesn't have a larger, meaning or like importance to our like metaphysical like view of the world. But I think the metaphysical view that's happening with Seth takes those identities to be much more deeply meaningful on like a higher level. Where like anytime there is one of these identities, it spirals off its whole like universe, right?
But I don't know how much of that is Seth trying to communicate abstract ideas to us. Like a variable x equals 3 is just an abstract concept. Does it really exist? No, it's just I'm telling you x
for the purpose of what we're doing is going to be
communicate.
Yeah.
Right. It's just to communicate.
Explains an idea.
Yeah.
Right. It isolates a thing, and then we can refer to it and then pronoun it. But
right.
Seth does say there are no true divisions, and if you extrapolate that, then if there are no true divisions, can you really identify anything? Isn't everything just a nebulous mess of everything?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, but that's what I mean by like there is no true X. We're just talking. We name it, and it's a thing. Mm-hmm. Like, where does Georgia really begin and end? We have the survey lines, but like, come on, it's just a piece of land.
Right.
We agreed that like here in Georgia there's these state laws, and in the next state there's different state laws, but it's just a piece of land.
Exactly. Right. We can say that, but then like imagine if I had a worldview where I believed in like the divine right of like kings, right? And I was like, this state of Georgia was given by God to my line of children. So now all of a sudden this line becomes really important to my worldview, right? Mm-hmm. Because like there's this whole metaphysical expanse of rationale for why if you step across this line, now you have to bow in front of me, right? Like, I'm extrapolating all this stuff off of this identity that doesn't really exist except for like very basic practical purposes. Like, I'm giving it more of an identity than it should have. Like,
Right.
you know, I'm reifying the identity.
Right. Like we're ascribing it meaning.
Yeah. And I'm suggesting that, you know, the idea of your personal soul or your personal self having these like higher ambitions and goals and connections to this like deeper consciousness does a reification of your own self as well. In a
I would agree.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But then, like, in the grander scheme of things, if Seth is over here just splitting off from Jade and Raz entity and being like, peace out, I'm going to do my own thing, sure, he's reifying his own, but in some other probable reality, maybe they stuck together, and that's just as valid.
Well, but isn't the entity level like above the temporal level?
That I don't know.
Right.
It's above our idea of time.
Because stuff happens.
There's some sort of equivalent to time, and I don't know if we can even understand it, but like Seth has hinted that there's
the great
it's not
unfolding of
it's
reality.
not like purely outside of time in a way, because like isn't it some paradoxical idea that like that because infinity is always growing,
I thought he said time was a secondary.
right? Our time, but
events still happen for entities, right?
Yeah.
Like, entities develop, and it's like, well, what dimension are they developing in, if not a temporal one? You know.
I think my understanding is that, you know, Seth has this idea of the spacious present. And I believe what he means is like everything's happening simultaneous. And like every sort of consciousness has some ability to perceive part of the spacious present. And the entity level perceives such a large swath compared to us that it's relatively timeless. Does that make sense? Like everything's happening at the same time. So at the entity level, Seth can perceive all the events in our future and past at the same time. So comparing those two levels, he's in a relatively timeless place. And I think if we pay attention most of the time when he's saying like, he's not saying I live in a pure timeless place. He's saying like, I don't have time in your terms.
Yeah.
He's saying that. So I think this is part of what I think we have to like keep in mind. We have to like try to like carry this heavy humility that like we can never like understand the absolute end. We were like laughing at the ideas of lame portrayals of heaven and stuff. Like we can only understand as far as we can reach with our imagination and our conceptions, and that will continue to, as we grow, that will continue to grow. But we're never gonna like sit here. This is partly why I'm saying like it's hard to like talk about infinity, because that's suggesting like that end point, which isn't even an end point.
Yeah. Have you ever read Slaughterhouse-Five?
No.
It reminds me of the aliens in that book. They have this thing where they're like not stuck, they're quote unquote unstuck from time. Where it's like a really weird way of thinking about it, where it's not that they don't exist in time. They have deterministic lives that go from birth to death. But their conscious experience of time is that they can choose to inhabit whatever part of their life they want to. So like if they have like a fun day out at the zoo, they can just keep going back and being like, man, I love that fun day at the zoo. I'm going to go think about that again, you know?
Yeah.
And if there's like a really sad part of their life, they can experience it one time and be like, that sucked. I'm not doing that again, you know?
It's kind of what we were talking about earlier with like the thought forms projecting through time. And I was suggesting that like, you know, in a breakup situation, you might be ruminating over these good days with your partner and like trying to imagine to what extent is my experience of those good days influenced by my future self reminiscing about it. Like, does that enhance my experience of it? Does it make it more intense?
Maybe more real even.
Yeah.
If the reader is interested, I highly recommend Slaughterhouse-Five. It's a fantastic book.
It's always been on my radar, and at some point I thought, like, maybe I'm too old to read it now and it won't hit me the same, because I read Fahrenheit
451,
and I was like, maybe I could have got into this when I was 14, but I don't think it's for me.
I didn't like Fahrenheit 451 as much. And it's weird because that's someone that they read in schools a lot,
Yeah.
because it's about like censorship and
Yeah.
stuff. But I would say Slaughterhouse-Five, much better book. He's a Vonnegut writer.
I'll check it out. I've never read any Vonnegut. I'm sure I have a copy somewhere. All right, where are we at? I feel like, Joe, there's something behind this quibble you have, and I think every time we talk about it, we get a little bit deeper, so we're going to have to like...
We're just itching at the scab.
Yeah, we're going to get there.
Okay, here's a much more textually based quibble. So I feel like there's like some... If we back up to the idea of... Now reframe, think about the performance of Seth as like a thing that Jane's doing, right? This is like, we're reading it in book form, but this was like a presentation that happened one time for an audience of Rob, right?
Yeah.
There's a couple points here that I think are really interesting in terms of that performance.
Okay.
So on page 88, I want you to think about what's getting said, because I think the pause in this paragraph is like kind of interesting and telling from a performative sense.
Okay.
Right? So in the middle of 88, Jane, as Seth says, your idea of space is then highly distorted, since space to you is simply where nothing is perceived. It is obviously filled with all kinds of phenomena. Pause. Thinks about what she just said. That make no impression at all upon your perceptive mechanisms. Right? So she says it is obviously filled with all kinds of phenomena, and then goes, oh wait, if it's filled with a bunch of phenomena, then they have to be phenomenal, which they're not. And then goes back and edits it and says, that make no impression upon your perceptive mechanisms.
The part I would quibble with there is like, who is it obvious for?
Scientists. There's stuff in there.
Oh,
So radiation.
meaning at that level. Okay.
Yeah. Gas molecules.
I was taking it in terms of like all these other thought forms and stuff that.
Yeah, because it says the idea of space, right? Because the idea of space is just the space is the nothingness where nothing is happening, you know, where nothing's perceived. And it's obviously filled with all kinds of phenomena. And it's like, well, is it obviously filled with all kinds of phenomena?
Well, is he talking about like outer space, or is he talking about just the air between you and me?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Because it's directed at the layperson's understanding of what space means, you know, as a dimension. Whereas I think if you talk to the layperson and you talk about space, they think of like, you know, Carl Sagan, like the cosmos, like that kind of thing, you know?
I'm confused. I feel like it's obvious. I mean, if you ask a child what's here, they'll tell you gas molecules. There's a ton going on in a molecule. Electrons are spinning.
I don't know if children know that. Like I subbed for some elementary science classes at one point that we did with this experiment, right? Where you make like a little scale, right? By putting a ruler on a piece of string, so it's like acts like a scale. And then you show the kids like, okay, I'm gonna put 2 balloons on each end of the scale. Look, the scale's not moving. Okay, I'm gonna put something heavier than a balloon on the scale. Oh, the heavier thing went down. And then you go, what do you think's gonna happen if I blow up one of the balloons? And then the kids think about it. And some of the kids think, well, they're both balloons, so it's gonna be balanced, right? You're just putting air in it, and air is nothing. Like there isn't anything in air. And some of the kids think, well, it's a balloon, so it's going to fly. So the balloon side's going to go up. And then some of the kids, if they were really paying attention when you were talking about matter, go, well, he's filling up the balloon with air, and he said air is matter, even though I can't see it. So maybe it'll be heavier because there's matter in it, right? But the kids, like, it's really split. Like, I don't think it's obvious to kids.
Was this pre or post-COVID?
This is post-COVID.
Yeah, I think that's because education kind of broke down.
But, you know, like, I think in the layperson's perspective, a lot of this is very not obvious.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
I don't make much of the pause there, but like the sentence itself, I would like him to expand upon it. Like, why is it obvious?
Yeah.
Because adding the second part is what makes it tricky to me.
Mm-hmm.
How can it be obvious if it's making no impression?
If it's making no impression, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like you said something and then was like, oh, I got to take it back.
Well, yeah. Or if it's obvious to him, but not to us, I don't know.
Maybe.
No, I disagree with you guys. He says it's filled with kinds of phenomena.
Yeah.
It's obvious because we learned about it. We're told it's true in science class, but then it makes no impression on our perceptive mechanism.
Yeah.
We know that there's nothing, like we can't sense it with our 5 senses,
Right.
but we know it's there.
That's probably what
Like I can't sense China now, but I know it's there.
It's obvious because
People tell me it's there.
we've created instruments and we can experiment, and I can move my hand and I can feel the air there.
Yeah.
Like it's obvious when you develop the basic sort of intelligence that, something's there.
I don't know. I would say for most of human history, most people didn't know.
Right.
Like,
right, but that's the threshold I'm talking about, like some sort of basic intelligence. But like people have been using sails for 1,000 years.
That's true, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or more. Like
wind seems like such an uncomplicated idea,
people know about wind.
People know about wind. The Dutch famously know about wind.
Yeah.
The Egyptians famously knew about wind. That was the only thing I had on that one. There's another one that comes up on 89 that I'll point out too.
Okay. We're still talking about, like this thought form or image, right? The image then follows its own laws of reality and to some extent and to a lesser degree than you has a consciousness. So that's further talking about the relevance of NPCs in reality.
Right.
That's why it's like a really cool insult, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's impossible. It's impossibly insulting. It's impossible for you to be an NPC, and yet I'm
implying that you behave as if you had no conscious.
You're so clueless that you're impossibly clueless.
Yeah,
it's funny.
I like this idea too. Like this image has its own consciousness because presumably, like in the phenomena people really have of these images, they seem to act of their own volition. It's not like somebody's like thought projecting them and like puppeteering them. It's like they have agency of their own, which I think like does line up with like most of the time people's experiences of apparitions is that they seem to be acting of their own, accord.
Yeah.
Yeah, it literally says that, right after it says, now you are using that analogy again sent out by a super self who strongly desired existence in a physical form. You are no puppet of this super self. You will follow your own lines of development, and through means far too difficult to explain here, you add to the experience of the super self and also then extend the nature of its reality, right?
Yeah. I mean, it should be obvious by now, but he's just taking us in both directions with everything. Like
it's like the mirrors thing.
Yeah, it's gradating above us and below us.
Whoa.
Does that help you understand like what we're quibbling about, like just the identity? Probably not. Like you can see, like according to what he's saying, like this thought form is just energy projected through our focus of emotions or thoughts, and that goes out, and we are a more intense version of a more intense being of the same phenomenon.
Yeah, it just seems to me like the self and the super self would be separate beings, like individuals, right? One creates the other, but like they're separate.
But he's always kind of saying like, yeah, they're separate and the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There are no two divisions.
Right.
I mean, you can see how like your thought projection is more part of yourself than is part of myself, right? That makes sense.
Yeah, because I don't have access to your internal mental faculty.
Yeah, so like it's all, contextual.
Right. Yeah, we're like, there's that idea of like the collective unconscious, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like I have access to my own unconscious more than you do, but we both sort of share in one unconscious together. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like, there's this like cut that goes between us, but it doesn't separate us completely. It just divides us into two sections of the same undivided humanity that has sort of topography to it.
Yeah.
And part of the topography is us. It's like maybe a good analogy now that I'm thinking about it is like a landscape, right? Where like a mountain both is an individual and is not an individual in a mountain range.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was trying to get at with like unified action creates an identity, a potential identity, I should say.
Isn't that like a Buddhist saying too, the mountain thing?
I don't know.
I think there's a Donovan song about it.
Really? Next episode, Joe's going to sing the Donovan song for us. Tune in.
89. I always love these. I'm going to read it again. I know I just keep doing the Rob stuff, but I love it. Seth says, now I wanted to begin this chapter this evening so that we would have a good start. I will give you an easy short session, however. And Rob says, I'm okay. And then Seth says, you yawned frequently. And then Rob says, that hardly matters. I feel pretty good right now. And then Seth says, take a very brief break then and we'll continue.
That back and forth always makes me wonder if does Seth know more than Rob does about himself, or
Oh, I think so.
yeah.
Like he's humoring him like like you
Yeah.
would a child, and a child's
Yeah.
like, I'm not tired, and they're like passing out.
No, you should probably go to. Yeah, I mean, yeah, because it's like it's this higher level entity that like presumably knows a lot more. That is also combined with his wife, who probably also knows a lot more than I do. So it's like, how are they not going to?
Got a lot of inside information.
But that's the thing I was going to point out about this, like in a more like textual analysis sense, right? Is like I feel like there's this interesting thing whenever Seth initiates the idea of having a like ending the session, and then Rob says no. I always find it interesting to see what comes out of Seth after that, right? Because presumably that means that like Jane or Seth has said the thing they want to say. And they're like, I'm kind of good. I said the thing I wanted to. And then Rob's like, no, just keep going. And it's like, is that, you know, if we're seeing this as Jane doing it, it's like Jane has to come up with the material much more like on the fly.
I feel like that's a good test if you're like questioning like the validity of what's happening here. It's like,
Yeah.
to what extent can Seth Jane continue with the material?
Right.
But like, I've read so much of this that like Seth will just go continue and continue and continue.
Didn't he say once that he could just dictate for a month straight? And you guys
That's
could
what
just
he
take it?
said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he primes Jane like in the background
Mm.
before the sessions, because sometimes she'll have like some thought or, you know, what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Like, some
she'll say before a session, like, I feel like Seth is going to talk about this.
Mhm.
Like, here it's kind of laid out in these books, but like some of those earlier sessions, like, they had no idea what he was going to talk about.
Right, yeah.
Kind of primer. Basically, because I think she would kind of get nervous otherwise.
I remember there was that part, right, where like she was intentionally like, I'm not going to read any of this stuff. I don't want Seth to tell me what he's going to talk about. I just don't want to even know.
It'd be hard to imagine like what you would feel like if you were experiencing a more higher intelligence like speaking through you.
Yeah.
That makes me think of, and we'll find this out later, he speaks to Richard, I don't know how to say his last name, Bach, B-A-C-H, the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull,
Okay.
who reached out to Jane because when he wrote that book, he just had it, the whole book just like appeared in his head. And all he had to do was like sit down and write it. And he had never met another author like that until he found Jane. He was like, oh, hey, we should talk about this. And we had a person in our dreams class, because Robert Wagner of the dreams class was telling us that if we want to be more creative, we can ask or like request creativity from the dream state, which is where all ideas come from anyway. And there was this one lady there who was saying that this happened to her, where she had been using Seth dream techniques. And this whole book just appeared in her head. And all she has to do, and all that she has been doing in the last 2 years, has every night she sits down for 2 hours and just types. And the book just comes out like fully formed.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I feel
So I
like
get-
many artists like claim to have moments of that.
Yeah. There's a lot of
Yeah.
famous songs that have been written like that. They just wake up and they're like, oh, I have to write this down before
Yeah.
I forget.
Yeah. Or whole albums, you know, where they like sit in the studio for like a whole day not sleeping and just like pound out the entire thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that's the closest we could get to like asking a person how does it feel to have all this info from an entity.
I suppose. And I'm trying to just imagine right now, like, if I could write that way, like, I don't know how I'd feel about it if, like, I just felt like I was, like, a secretary to this, like, other being writing something.
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah,
I think that's partly what she's struggling with, too. But
That is.
she has her own creativity, obviously, that's, like, contemporaneous with this output.
Oh, yeah. Her intro is like, to me, one of the most fascinating parts about the whole thing. you
But, I
know?
mean, like, she's constantly writing her own books at the same time as she's producing these.
Right.
That's true.
But that's what Richard Bach struggled with Jonathan Livingston Seagull. He asked Seth, like, can I really say this is my book? Ew, I feel like I haven't touched it at all. And Seth was like, it is definitely your book because it goes through your consciousness and your consciousness, like, puts an indelible mark on it.
Yeah.
So it is yours. Like, he's trying to assure him, like, it's okay to take credit.
Yeah.
Yeah. The higher entity doesn't care about the royalties. Like, you're good.
I
bro.
don't know. It's going to
Yeah.
sue you later on.
So, like, I guess that's the question then. Like, what comes out of the rest of the end of this session? Because it's only like a couple pages. And then Seth's like, all right, we're done. But, like, what's the, like, furtherance, you know?
You mean after that pause?
After the pause, yeah.
Or after he offered to take a break or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
I have a few things highlighted, and we'll see. Your present personality, as you think of it, is indeed indelible and continues after death to grow and develop. There are obviously an infinite number of gradations in the types and kinds of forms of which we have been speaking. That energy which is projected from our super self, that spark of intense identity that resulted in your physical birth, that unique impetus, in the one way, has many similarities to the old concept of the soul, except that it contains only a part of the story. While you continue to exist and develop as an individual, your whole self or soul has such vast potential that it can never be expressed fully through one personality, as somewhat explained in the previous chapter.
I'll note, too, that there's this intertextual parenthetical part where Rob notes, Jane was now pausing very noticeably between many phrases as she delivered this material. Right? So, like, after this pause, it seems like Jane slows down a lot more and has to be very deliberate about thinking about what comes next and what she's saying.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if she claimed that the experience of channeling, like, drained her or not.
Oh, I don't remember.
I feel like sometimes it energized her.
Sometimes it definitely did energize her, yeah.
I know even in this book, some of the ways that Rob's been writing about the parentheticals, he's like very interested in like the pausing and the going quickly part. And it seems like it's kind of like randomly, like you'll like sometimes start really slow and then finish like really fast, or like slow down in the middle and then speed up again. It seems like it's all over the place.
Yeah. My impression is it's just all those like inner psychological mechanics that are happening between, you know, two very different types of, you know, beings.
Yeah, and some concepts are harder to put into words than others, right?
They're crossing dimensions. It'll be later in this chapter, but there's the part where he's talking about like different streams of consciousness. It's like if you're able to like walk to this other stream, you might see a very peculiar kind of fish pop up, and then he's like, I am indeed one of these fish. You know, he crossing from another dimension into ours. I mean, it's presumably what's happening here.
Hey, Lamau.
Set?
It's just the thing people say when they're talking about aliens.
What do they say?
Hey, Lamau.
I don't even know. Oh, ALMO?
Yeah.
Yeah. Funny.
I mean, I guess, you know, I'm being critical of it, but I think at the really end of this, on page 90, is where like I thought one of the coolest ideas from this whole chapter comes out, which is that part that we talked about earlier with like the probable past, you know? And like how rich of an idea like a probable past is to even like chew on, you know, that for all the you know, gripes that I have about like, oh, well, blah, 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 and then she needs to pause. Like after the pause, that's when we get one of these really cool, interesting, juicy ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know enough of the broader material to know that there's just like, you know, 30 books of just this like, I mean, just look how much discussion we're getting out of just these few pages, you know.
True.
This just goes on and on and on and on. And so it's like, if I'm not like fully convinced of like what is claiming to be happening here is, I'm very comfortable with just completely setting it aside and just like focusing on these ideas. Doesn't matter where they come from, but I've said this before, but like it would be more unbelievable to me if like this was just coming, if Jane can make all this up.
I mean, yeah, it would speak to a really incredible talent, right?
Yeah, she'd be the best sci-fi writer ever.
Yeah.
Did you have anything on the end of this?
You're presently focused not only in your physical body, but within a particular frequency of events that you interpret as time. Kind of just speaks to like a lot of things we're talking about, but again, I like to get all these like different paraphrases of these concepts. Certain frequency of events that you interpret as time.
I guess there is one section I'd want to read just because there's something. I just want to reiterate it to the listener. He says you're presently focused not only in your physical body, but within a particular frequency of events that you interpret as time. Other historical periods exist simultaneously in forms quite as valid, and other reincarnational selves. Again, you're simply not tuned to those frequencies. You can know what happened in the past and have histories because according to the rules of the game that you accepted, you believe that the past but not the future can be perceived. You could have histories of the future and present if the rules of the game were different. In other levels of reality, the rules of the game change. After death, in your terms, you are quite free perceptively. The future appears as clearly as the past. Even this is highly complicated, however, for there is not just one past. Earlier when we were talking about probable past and how like difficult it is for us to imagine not having time, it reminded me a lot of how one of like the hallmark, at least to me, identifiers of a near-death experience is regardless of what cultural background or religious background they're from, they always say that they are, when they're in the near-death experience, they always say they notice that there is no time. Which, as like a person who has not died and come back to remember it, I don't even fathom how you could feel that. Well, that's like asking someone, what does milk taste like? Do you have to taste it? How am I supposed to tell you in words what it feels like to be like, oh, there's no time here? What do you mean? Like, I'm not sitting here feeling like, oh, the seconds are passing. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, they always say that. It doesn't matter how old or young they are. They're always just like, there's no time here. But what does that feel like, and what does that mean?
I think from their perspective, it's a familiar feeling.
Right.
And
but
so, like, that's why they're putting it in those terms and expecting other people to understand it. I mean, it's literally probably the best way to put it. It just, how do you quantify your own understanding of the feeling?
Yeah,
exactly. It just
I would immediately jump to, I don't know if you guys have any experience with psychedelics, but I think that's the closest that I come to of, I wouldn't say I've ever experienced no time, but I've experienced profound changes in the intensity of time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I think it's a relatively common experience to change your intensity of temporal experience, right? Like if you're in like a car accident or something. Like I've been in situations where it's like you really feel time just go slow, like really slow. And it's just like your mind's perfectly capable of keeping up and just like, oh, I should probably do this. All right, let me move my body. And then it starts moving really slow. And you're like, oh, I'm noticing this other thing while I'm moving. Like your mind's going so much faster than everything else around you. And it really does feel like time's like, okay, this thing's a lot squishier than I thought it was, you know?
Right.
I've had experiences on LSD where I literally thought it was like 8 hours had passed and it was like 10 minutes, you know? And it, you know, Seth says this, but my own interpretation is that like, in some sense, time is intensity. I think we were at book club earlier, and I think that was even more or less said that on Seth's level, what we perceive of as time is experienced as intensity.
Yeah. And I think we've all had like dreams that have spanned hours, but you wake up and like 10 minutes have passed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even, you know, you don't dream and then you wake up and you're like, oh my God, what time is
it? That's true. Yeah.
The Roy video game on Rick and Morty. Did you remember that one? He like lives a whole lifetime and it's just like takes like 15 minutes.
I've had friends who tell me they've had dreams like that where they wake up and they're like, I had a wife and kids, and they're actually devastated.
Yeah.
And years later, they're just like, man, that seemed more profound than a dream.
Yeah, this is like, the dream. That was their real life.
I wonder if they can use that, you know, feeling to guide them. Like if that was like, if they were meant to like touch into this probable future and you know.
Yeah, I personally think it might be a reincarnational life that they were dipping into.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like I know Seth talks about like some people are really attached to a different reincarnational life.
Back to this quote, I just wanted to mention like that the people who have experienced like flatlining and coming back have sometimes said they can clearly perceive the future because they realize, oh, if I don't decide to go back into my body, my children will grow up with like an abusive stepmother. Or whatever. If I do go back in, then the probable past will be that they'll be fine. So, you know, they begrudgingly agree to come back.
Because presumably they had chosen to die, and now they're getting new information. They're like, better not.
Yeah, they're given the choice, but they're able to see what will happen if.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense, right? If like you already have the experience of like, oh, well, time's not real here. Well, then future has to be like multiple futures, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's probably the closest that any of us could get to feeling not time is flatlining and come back, but maybe don't do that deliberately because it's a little sketchy.
Have you ever seen the show, the OA?
No, but
a Netflix show.
Isn't that the one that people say is really Sethian?
I think it's pretty Sethian, and I liked it, and it's definitely pretty weird.
What's the OA stand for?
I don't even know why they called it this, but I think it stands for the original angel.
Okay. I know that there's a different OA. That's like the secret society inside of the Boy Scouts.
Oh,
The
really?
Order of the Arrow.
Okay.
Interesting.
It's a lot of cryptic OAs happening, but
Yeah.
there's 2 seasons of that show, and I've watched them twice, and I like it. I think it's
Is there an actual
not-
ending?
yeah, of sorts. You know, the way shows end. Some people are really disappointed with the way the second one ended, and I can see why. I'm not that worried about it, but
Why'd you bring it up?
just the idea. I don't want to give too much away, but the idea of like deliberately experiencing NDEs.
Oh, got you.
I don't want to say anymore, but
Listener, do not look up Facebook groups for this. I guarantee you there is nobody that will help you experience a near-death experience. It's probably very illegal, and we do not endorse that.
I feel like there's less intrusive ways to have deeper experiences.
Just
Oh,
do
yeah.
some drugs. Don't do auto asphyxiation.
It's
Just do
funny
drugs.
that like drugs are the milder version of that, but for sure,
Yeah,
yeah, death is more lethal than drugs usually.
true facts.
Well, on that note,
On that,
is that a session?
yes.
We'll pick up next time.
Please
Joe's
go.
gonna sing Donovan.
Hell yeah.
That's our show, but fear not, the never-ending conversation continues next week. If you're enjoying the show, please be so kind as to subscribe, like, rate, and review, and if you're feeling frisky, tell a friend. Contact us at implicatingthereal@gmail.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/implicatingthereal. We are doing our best, but whatever support you can lend helps us appreciably. We are not affiliated with the publishers or proprietors, but we encourage you to get the books. You can follow along as we endeavor to dive deep into the Sethian worldview, and there's really nothing like cultivating your own relationship with the material. Until next week, we wish you a fond good evening.